Thank you for joining us for this live today with Victoria. Hi, Victoria, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a very hot day here in New York today, so I'm happy to be in an air-conditioned room and speak to you.
Yeah, I'm also in the AC. Yeah, the world is getting hot, right? I mean,
Yeah,
everywhere.
in all sorts of ways. I'm really feeling it right now.
Definitely. And so I called our live today Stop Being Nice because we talked about nice versus kind and how we tend to be very nice and it's not really serving us. But before we get there, let's tell us a little bit about your beginning because I think it's very inspiring story how you moved to the US and share a little bit about that transition. You were 18, I think, when you moved to the US.
I was 18 when I moved to London, and
Ah,
then
to
I moved to
London.
the US
Okay.
about three years later. I came by myself. I was basically packed a bag and came in, and then I needed a job. I was in law school prior in my home country of Russia, and my situation at home was not great, and I just needed to escape. And I was like, I speak English. I spoke pretty decent English, and I was like, where's the country that I can go to that I have a visa at? And that was England at that time, and I really loved England. But I arrived with literally $500 in my in my pocket, a bag full of clothes, and literally I remember getting to Paddington Station from Heathrow Airport. It was evening time, and I came out and I looked around, and I'm like, okay, so what do I do now? How do I start? Like, I'm actually not sure. And I was just 18 years old back then, but
Yeah.
very quickly I tapped into like the immigrant community, and I learned that to my luck, this was a time in fashion where very thin, very young, and usually very blonde models were very in fashion, let's put it that way.
Mm.
And a lot of them were Russian, and because the girls were so young, they barely spoke English, and they had to go to a lot of these sets where, the expectations were weird and vague, and, they needed somebody to advocate for them. And the photographers who needed to communicate with these models, they also needed a translator who would be able to, be kind of like an intermediary between the
Yeah.
photographers and the models. And I somehow very quickly ended up in this position, and that was my first big negotiation gig. But at the time, I didn't realize that I was negotiating. I was like, oh, I'm just surviving and interesting. Like, I'm just all the time on these big photography sets. And after a while, that took off my own photography career. And that's, about the time when I came to New York.
Yeah, and you mentioned negotiations, and this is one of the things I wanted us to talk about. So you mentioned you didn't think you were negotiating, you were just surviving, and I think there's something about that we are afraid to even call ourselves negotiators or even go there unless we are forced into that. And why is that? Why is it so difficult for women to negotiate, based on
Well,
your
I think that
experience?
the first thing that I'm discovering is that I studied negotiation at this point in academic settings. Um, I feel like I'm very comfortable with the word negotiation, but a lot of people are not. So
Yeah,
every now and then I go to like these big networking events, or like I chat to people and I'm like, oh, I help people with negotiation. And everybody's like, oh, I don't have any negotiations going on. And I'm like, well, I help people with conflict. And they look at me like, I don't have any conflict. And then they start talking, and then I realize their whole life is negotiation and conflict. Like, well, what are they talking about? But after a while, somehow negotiation and conflict, those two words, became nearly like dirty words, something that people are afraid of. It's like nearly like, whoa, 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 I don't have that. I don't have any
yeah,
conflict. I just have some issues at work. And I try not to tell people very much that this is negotiation, negotiation. Instead, I'm like, this is executive communication. This is, very effective communication. And in a lot of ways, it calms people down because they realize, okay, so that's not something scary, because negotiation is something that I do maybe once or twice in my life when I change jobs or I buy a house. It doesn't feel like a daily practice. But in reality, we negotiate multiple times a day. And the way we negotiate and the way we show up to these processes, which is our executive presence, really defines how we're being read for people by other people around us. And down the line, this is something that becomes one of the key factors for progressing in a career. So at a certain point, for example, in a seniority in a corporate ladder, you already have everything you need in your resume. But in the meantime,
Yeah.
who is considered for that massive promotion? It's usually the person with the most executive presence. This is exactly how you negotiate really matters. This is exactly how you show up really matters. But it's not something that people think about on a day-to-day basis, unfortunately. Yet I'm working on it.
You're working on it. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's. I think one of the challenges is because negotiation sounds like okay, it's like a battlefield. It's something you need to have a strong personality, and it's something negative and hard and hostile.
Yeah, but it doesn't need to be at all. And actually,
Yeah,
that kind of attitude to negotiation is usually not the most effective one. Again, there's a lot of different types of negotiation, and there's a lot of different approaches to, conflict that we can take. One of them is to basically do one over somebody else, is like to win, is to push at any cost, which is very popular in worldwide politics at the moment, and we're dealing with a lot of very strong men kind of politics. But the reality is these kind of agreements, they very rarely last, because unless both sides of any conflict, of any agreement, have a real buy-in to whatever, the future holds for both, the moment the power dynamic changes a little bit, they're going to try to course correct. So one of the negotiation techniques that I am fond of is actually collaborative negotiation. Even if somebody is stronger than the other one, it's still in the mutual interest of both to work together. So even if the weather changes at some point in time, both are equally happy or equally unhappy walking away from their negotiation
definitely.
table. Yeah.
I'm with you on that. I see. I look at negotiation as problem solving, and both sides need to get something out of that, and hopefully both sides will be happy with the result.
Because if they're happy with the result, they're going to stick to it. If they're not happy
Exactly.
with the result, they will forever try to course correct, and eventually they will. And then you will have to renegotiate, and a lot of things that have been agreed on in the past, like they're just not going to hold. That is also another interesting misconception about women in negotiation, which is something that I deal with a lot. Very oftentimes, because people believe in, like, people have I wouldn't say believe in, they have exposure to like this hard men negotiation techniques. You have very well-known negotiators who are like FBI profile people, people who like
Yeah,
take people of hostages. And I'm like, great, that's fantastic, and that should be happening. But in the meantime, we should be talking about negotiation on a day-to-day basis. We should also be talking about what negotiation looks like in your family, in your job situation right now, and maybe we need some collaborative negotiators. Potentially, we need more women in this career as well, and I'm
I
really
think
trying to make
that
a difference.
definitely we need more women in there. We also
I
need
think
more women in politics, by the way, but because you touched on politics. But yes, we need more women there. And I assume you refer to Chris Voss or those kind
yeah.
of tactics. Some of them are in a way I actually like his book, but some of it is a little bit manipulating the mind, which I find interesting. But I agree with you that the approach should be collaborative. And I wanted to ask you, go back to like your early career. When did you realize that you actually have to stand up for yourself, have to negotiate, have to worry about your you call it executive presence? When did that light bulb light for you?
Well, the light bulb that what I'm doing is negotiation happened 20 years into a career, which was really funny for me. But even in the very early days, when I was like my very early 20s and like late teens, and I was managing talent on these big photo shoots, which very oftentimes I was like the assistant or the studio manager, and my job was to have people come in, and I was like inviting them, setting them up for the day, making sure that, the day goes as planned, because there's a lot of really big personalities. I realized that I have to sometimes calm people down. Sometimes we need to change a little bit of the volume of the situation. Sometimes we need to set expectations, especially when you work with people. in media who are usually very big personality kind of people. So I started developing those skills and I just knew that those skills were working, but I didn't have any academia behind it. Then down the line, I realized that I have to negotiate a lot with my clients, and that was in my photography days. What was interesting is that when you are a freelancer, when you're an artist, you have to apply for the job and negotiate your contract multiple times a month because every single like most people just apply for the job, they get accepted once, and then they just work. An artist like that has to negotiate all the time. And at some point in my career, which was maybe about 10 years ago, I found myself in a very peculiar situation. I was um I was one of the only women doing what I did. At the moment there's a lot more women, which is amazing, but back then it was just the beginning of that and I was very lucky to be part of it. I was also younger than a lot of my competitors,
Mm-hmm.
and but I was still doing the same exact jobs for these exactly the same clients. And somehow I started looking around and I was like, it's so interesting. I can barely afford like a studio one bedroom apartment in New York at the time. And I see a lot of my competitors having like this real estate portfolios in the Hamptons, and like somehow we're doing the same job and like they're able to afford this and I can barely afford that. Where's the mismatch? And for the longest time I thought, okay, so I just need to work harder. I need to have more magazine covers. I need to have more celebrities. I need to, and then I kept doing that for years and years, absolutely breaking my neck. And I looked around and I'm like, somehow I'm not winning. Like the situation's not changing. Yes, I'm getting like the glorified, whatever it is, like outside, like my portfolio looks amazing. But somehow my real estate portfolio doesn't seem to be materializing. I'm like, what's going on here? And then, after some research, I learned that I was frequently paid up to like 10 times less than my competitor for exactly the same gig. And that had to do with the fact that I wasn't negotiating very well for myself. The other thing is like it's a very uncontrolled, and now it's getting a little bit better, but still really terrible industry. And a lot of times, how you show up for those negotiations and how you present yourself really educates how much money you're going to be paid. And at that point in time, I'm like, okay, we're not just lucky to be doing this job. Now we have to present very differently. And I started changing things around me, and that actually really helped with some of my contracts. But down the line, I went to university. I went to Harvard and then to Columbia, and studied negotiation in depth. And I was like, so what makes the difference when two different people come into the room with exactly the same given factors, like let's say exactly the same portfolios, with exactly the same client for exactly the same job, and somehow one walks out of that room being paid 10 times more, and the other one is coming out like feeling lucky that they were able to do the job in the first place. And I made it my life's work. And at this point in time, that's all I study. And I'm very excited to share everything that I'm finding with anybody who would listen.
So I'm listening. Tell me, how can I make 10 times more money?
Well, it really depends situation by situation. It really also depends on the age. It depends on the gender. It depends on a lot of things. That there is no like one general advice that you can give to people. I like to focus on women. I find, you have to pick your player, and I pick women, for
Definitely, I'm with you. I also pick women.
well, it doesn't mean women are better anyways, but somebody has to fight for them. I'm going to do that. And one thing that I'm learning is that to be a woman in negotiation is actually enormously tricky. One of the reasons for it is that we are being perceived very different than men when it comes to executive presence. Let me go a little bit deeper into that. And that's one of my like most favorite subjects. Um, Men in when they become a big executive, whatever they do, they're usually evaluated on their performance. And then you're like, okay, so this man did all of those things, and usually the accomplishments are coming in first.
Yeah.
When we're describing women in the same exact position, we usually talk about her likability first. We sometimes talk about what she looks like second. And then maybe we're going to get to the list of her accomplishments. And that is very complicated. I studied a lot about like where does this come from and why do we evaluate women so differently from men? And I think the reason is that when we're babies, when we're very, very little, most of our caregivers are usually women. Women are the ones who are going to pick us up and like put a band-aid on our boo-boo. Women are the ones who are going to tell us that everything's going to be all right. Most of the kindergarten teachers, most of, primary school
Most of
teachers,
the teachers in general are
most
women.
of the teachers in general are women. So for the longest time, people are being surrounded with these kind, warm, and compassionate women who try to do their best to help you succeed. Then you come into an environment where the woman is, let's say, your boss, and she needs to give you a negative review. And then you look at her, you're like, what are you doing? Something doesn't seem to be something doesn't seem to be vibing here. You're supposed to be warm and nurturing and kind, but why are you not acting this way right now? So one of the things that happens to us is that we actually feel cheated. We feel like something's wrong with her. We feel like who does she think she is? And that's when the words like, I don't know, bitchy or bossy
Yeah.
or anything like that comes in, because we're trying to figure out, why do we feel some kind of way when if the man was giving us exactly the same negative performance review, for example, we would actually be feeling very different. We have a problem with that woman not acting out to the same stereotype that we have for her. Now, when we think about leadership in general, like big time leaders, what we think about usually is this warrior that takes, their people to, let's say, a battle. Even if you go into like old Egyptian, like old Egyptian myths, old Greek myths, like anything out there, it's always this leader who actually at that time sometimes could be a woman as well, but mostly men. They would take you to like this battle, and then they would handle all the obstacles with so much grace, with so much power. They would be so successful at it, and then eventually would tell stories about their presence and how they're not scared of anything. But there is a mismatch between that image and the image of a very warm and kind woman who is supposed to care for us and put a band-aid on on our boo-boo. Now, because of that, and the fact that right now we have more and more women in leadership, which is something that we really need, we need to fix that mismatch. Women feel that. So even if they don't have the language yet to speak about it, they're like, I know that I can't act like my male counterpart. And one of the things that they decide to do is either to soften their language. So, when they have to give a negative review, let's say, let's get back to that negative review. One of the things that they try to do is over explain when they don't have to. They try to soften the language as much as they can. They try to be as nice and as sweet as they possibly can while delivering the same news. This is like a prototype of an over accommodating woman, which unfortunately happens a lot. The problem with that is that it doesn't bring you up into a more executive presence, and down the line makes you look weak, because
Yeah.
people actually don't like somebody who is too soft to them in the long term. They're going to look at you as weak. And if you're looking for that big career progression, this is not something that's going to get you there. Now, the other prototype, which is like significantly less women pick that, but still quite a few, is the ice queen prototype. It's kind of like, I exist outside of all these metrics. I'm going to be harder than any man out there. I'm going to double down every single time I can. And that creates, like, there's a lot of ice queens that immediately come to mind, and we usually know that person very well. The problem with that archetype is that this is not a very collaborative person. Down the line, we're not going to go to this leader with our big creative ideas. We're also not going to feel that we can collaborate with them. We're not going to feel like we want to share things to them, because this looks like a woman who is like a punisher a lot of times. So one of the things that I do with my clients, for instance, is that we try to find this perfect in between, and a lot of this communication, which down the line builds them up to be both a very firm but also very compassionate leader. That a lot of times is where the nice versus kind thing comes about, is that niceness very frequently is over accommodating. This is something that you come in and you're like, oh, well, we need to soften, we need to be nice, we need to be sweet. But sometimes kindness is actually quite different from being nice. Kindness is sometimes cutting through the bullshit and delivering really good, really solid feedback, but in a way that is not supposed to hurt, that in a way that's helping you grow. And, the counterpart needs to be receptive to that.
For
Anyways, I
sure.
spoke for a while now. Let me know what
Yeah.
you
So
think
first
about
of all, I mean, I completely agree, and I had an ice queen as a manager. My first manager was like that, and it's still like an experience I would love to forget. Um, And this being, I think I struggle with that many years, and a lot of women that I coach struggle with that because, especially when you grow into leadership role, at least for me, I wanted to please. I wanted people to like me. I wanted to be likable. I wanted to stay in being nice and likable. And that led me to being afraid of directness, of giving, as you said, like giving feedback, of potentially getting into, I don't know if arguments, but conflicts, situations where there may be a conflict. And yeah, that was not good. Not for my progression, but also not for the people that I led. And I think that one way to look at this, and this is difficult, by the way, not just for women, but for a lot of men who are stepping into leadership, is as a leader, if you are trying to be too nice and you're not really direct and you're not providing, if we're talking about feedback,
Mhm.
clearly enough, you're not serving the people you lead very well, because that doesn't lead to their growth. They don't understand that they've done something wrong or where they can grow. It's very vague. Sometimes it's even not seen as feedback.
That is very true. Then there is another aspect of this is that what you're talking about is a lot of conflict avoidance. And that has to do with the fact that we were usually not brought up to be comfortable with conflict. Every
Yeah.
time conflict comes, we're like, oh, anything but conflict. That reminds me of like how we started this conversation is when I tell like big groups of people that I manage conflict. I was like, oh, no, 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 no. Just don't say that word. Don't never say that word. But one thing that I found through my career and a lot of the academic background that I studied is that conflict very frequently becomes transformative. And if managed well, you come out on the other side of the conflict better than where you were before. Because conflict, in a lot of ways, is like, I don't know, if we think about disease, conflict is a rash on top of your skin. But that rash is usually it's unpleasant. You want to hide it. You want to put makeup on it. You're like, just do anything but look at this. Like, of course, please don't look at it. But the reality is that not looking and not covering will not stop it. It will continue spreading. And usually the reason for it is somewhere deep. And once you fix that reason, once you look systemically, what is happening within your body that this is coming out, at some point you will be able to feel happier, to be better. You know what I mean? Not think about it to begin with.
Yeah.
I have seen people start with insane conflict and absolutely, I'm going to use a very strong word, hating their counterpart. And through mediation, through very structured conflict resolution techniques, coming out on the other side, feeling closer to that person than some of their best friends. There is this opportunity there because if it brings out, if this conflict, if this situation brings out so much emotion and so much physical response, it also means that you really care. If you really care, that care can be transferred.
So that kind of reminded me of it is a situation I had at work that I was in the situation that we had strong emotions, right? Like, I don't know if I hated this person, but I highly disliked that person and we were
Yeah.
not able to agree. So let's say you're in this situation, like you have someone at work maybe, and the hardest conflicts I found are the ones with people that you don't directly manage, like with stakeholders or peers, you don't have like any authority over them. So let's say a woman is in a situation like that. She has a colleague, they don't get along, they don't agree on anything. They need to work together though. And each one of them is trying to push to a different direction. Like, do you have any? I know it's kind of very generic question, but do you have any kind of strategies you can recommend a woman can try at least in those situations?
Of course. Well, every situation is different.
Mm-hmm.
It's better to speak to somebody who understands conflict and can help manage that. One of the most effective ways in organization to deal with a situation like that is to have internal organizational mediation. Is basically somebody who is senior of both, but not necessarily has a closer relationship to one or the other, come into the situation and basically perform mediation. Mediation is fantastic because, in a lot of ways, it's a structural conversation that usually people can't have with each other because there's too many feelings and there's too many presumed facts about the
Mm.
situation or the person in front of you. The third party always helps with that because, in a lot of ways, they can cut through those things. Mediation also needs to be private, like you need to have some sort of uh, discretion around it. You know what I mean? In order to be able to speak correctly, there's always a lot of this is in the hands of the mediator, is the person who is in that situation, how well they're trained and how well they understand the process and how well they can manage it. For majority of organizations, there's actually like a manager who does it and who unfortunately doesn't have a lot of training, and
Yeah.
training here is very, very important. But one thing that I found is that when things get pretty toxic, you usually need the third party, a very good balanced third party with just the right amount of power, so like they're a senior to you, but also, it can look like they're, presumed on one side versus the other. So like a close relationship with one of the people in the conflict would actually be a problem for that mediator to come in. But in a lot of ways, like, it's just seek somebody who fits that criteria and ask them to help you facilitate that conversation. There's a lot of beauty that can come from that facilitation. What do you
Now
think?
you reminded me another case that I had someone that I didn't go, and we did have. I didn't even knew that this person was a mediator back then, but he was. So reminded me of the situation that actually worked. It was still frustrating as hell. And also, I felt like I'm in kindergarten, to be honest, because every time we didn't agree, we had to go to this mediator and, oh, help us solve the problem. And he was like there in the middle, trying to kind of bring us together. And in a
It
way,
works.
it worked, but in another way, it was very. I felt a little bit childish, even that we need someone external because we're two adults. It's a workplace. We're supposed to be professional. And also another thing,
Oh, your
not
your
always we
standards are
have
too
this
high for
media.
yourself.
Sorry.
Your standards are too high for yourself. It's okay to have help, and it's okay
No,
to have.
it's okay to have help, but I felt at that point that it was a dependency,
Yeah.
that we really depended on this mediator to solve, and we had a lot of conflicts on a regular basis. So I felt it's too much that we are dependent on this mediator to bridge us.
Well, in a lot of ways, I can't tell for the quality of that mediator. If the mediator is doing a really good job, it goes way beyond the actual conflict at hand. A lot of times it's repair of the relationship. It's like it's a version of therapy, but it's not exactly therapy, and it could be very healing. One of the reasons to have mediation is a very good mediator will make you understand why the other person has that conflict with you. It's not even looking at this conflict to begin with, but it kind of goes a little bit deeper and brings people on the same side. Sometimes not exactly, but at least understanding the background of the other person. One of the things that I love, it's an amazing technique in negotiation, which is called indirect negotiation, which is when you bring two parties that are in a lot of conflict with each other and you kind of sit them on the couch or whatever you can sit them and speak to each one of them in front of the other person while not engaging with the other person. The thing here is that usually when they speak to each other, their emotions get so heated and they have so much presumed misunderstanding with each other that just looking at the other person is going to fire them up. But hearing this person explain their side of the story to a neutral party in front of them can actually shine some light of where they're coming from. It makes them human. One of the things that we usually do in conflict is that when we really want to have a fight with somebody, we try to dehumanize the other person. We're like, well, they don't have a good reason to act the way they are. They're doing this because something about them is broken. You know what I mean? Like, and then we'll find out some ridiculous reason. In a very small, fraction of the world, maybe that's true, but for majority of the cases, that would not be the truth. They have their own interests that maybe are not matching your interests. Potentially, they have a different worldview that doesn't match your worldview. They just have different values. There is a reason why they're acting the way they're acting. Very few people are just like asshole for the sake of being asshole. Like, again, they exist, but that's a very small fraction of the world. Majority of the time, there is a reason. Just learning about that reason and learning about it in a way that you can relate to it could solve a problem. In a very good mediation, sometimes you can come out of mediation not even having a problem anymore. You know, that can happen. But that's again the problem with the fact that we just don't have enough conflict awareness. In general, there is very few people, there is very few managers who are being trained on mediation, and that should be happening the moment you manage more than two people, because any group of people will have conflict, and that conflict can become transformative. Again, one of the things that you're describing now that, is kind of triggering this thought process in me is that if you continue to have friction with this person, like again, there's a small chance that this person is actually just evil and bad and like everything they love is conflict. That exists. But in a lot of cases, it's just bad management, and sometimes that management can be transformative. I know it's probably not what you want to hear, but that's
No, I think it makes a lot of sense, but I think that there are two occasions I remembered as you were talking. One of them, I think the person was a little bit of a, I don't know if to call him a jerk, but he was very self-centered and look at he really wanted to promote himself and what he was doing, and there was constant conflict because I was really trying to look at it from like what was the right thing to do versus what is right for me. And it's very difficult when you're in a situation with someone that maybe doesn't have very pure intentions. Like they do want to promote themselves, and no matter what you'll say or do, I mean, I think that's part of it was why it was so difficult. And also, I was much younger and maybe took it too much to heart and was too emotional into that. And I think eventually we're all people and we have emotions.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how much space do we give to those emotions? And in those two cases, I was really emotional. I mean, I was angry, I was frustrated, and it showed, and it was not serving me very well.
I can understand.
And it comes with maturity, I think, to realize that, yeah, I have to, it's okay to feel those things and to have those emotions, but when you come to the conflict, you need to put as much as possible some of the emotions aside and try to really listen to the other side and be less flared up.
That's very true. There's a lot of techniques that work for it, and I'll speak about them in just a second. But one of the interesting things that you said just now is that this person was interested in self-promotion, and then they wanted to succeed. And your conflict with him was, or him, they, them, was that you felt like you just wanted to get the task done. That's actually a very common thread in conflict, but it doesn't have to do much with the task. It has to do with value alignment and exactly the picture of the world syncing. In this case, one of the most effective things to do is to make yourself aligned with their personal success. You know what I mean? If they see you as an essential part of them getting where they want, they will actually treat you very differently. And in a lot of ways, what you're seeing here is that I want the task done, they want themselves promoted. And these two things, they start having friction with one another. But in a lot of ways, as long as the framing of this changes, these two things can happen at the same time. You can't change their worldview, but you can, in a lot of ways, align what you want with what they want and potentially make those things dance together. Again, I don't have enough information about this story or this situation.
To be honest, it happened so many years ago, I don't even remember all the details. But I remember there were a lot of arguments and a lot of emotions. And as I said, I was still very young. Back then, both age-wise and in my career. I was relatively at the beginning of my career, so I was very
I hear you. I've been
emotional.
there as well. One thing that I feel like all these years in negotiation training have really adjusted for me is I stopped being very reactive when people come with emotions and they come with positions. In a negotiation, we have two types of ways of looking at where the person's at. One thing is their position, which is what they're saying. So, like, if you look at, my 5-year-old daughter, her position is, "I want ice cream now." Like, that's a position because it's something that she states that she wants. This is exactly where she's at, but it doesn't really inform her interests. You know what I mean? Interest is something that is underneath your position. So, yes, she wants ice cream now, but in reality, she just wants the sugar hit and she wants to show her sister that she has an ice cream when the sister doesn't have an ice cream. So, she wants to do one over her. This is her interest. That's a little bit deeper. And in that case, when people come with their position, and a lot of times positions are like, I want this. I want that. No, like it could sound more serious, but like honestly, the structure of it is all the same. It's much more useful to kind of like look past what they're saying and try to figure out what their actual underlying interests are. Same thing happens with um job interviews, for instance, or like salary negotiations. Sometimes people come in and they say, I want, like, I don't know, $500,000 a year. Let's put something like that out there. And then you're like, "Well, I can't pay you that." And then you're like, "Well, I want this." "No, I can't pay that." "Well, I want this." "No, I can pay this." Eventually, everything flares up. They look at the employer, they think employer is terrible. The employer looks at the person, they're completely unreasonable. But there is a way of looking at it and saying, "Okay, so what are the interests underlying that person who is basically his position is that he wants this amount of money per year?" A lot of times this could be that he has maybe 4 children and requires a lot of childcare because he needs to be in office all of those days. You know what I mean? Like that could be the interest that we have not found out yet, but that which is could be laying underneath the position. It could also be the fact that in order to appear in office, the amount of times that the employer wants, they need to have a house that is in a neighborhood that is significantly more expensive. So there is a lot of bottom line negotiating factors. You can say, as an employer, you can say, okay, so I can't pay you that, but I can say that you should only be in person 1 day a week and you can be with your family the rest of the times. You know what I mean? You can say, have more vacation days. You can say something along the lines of, like, okay, you can live further out. Let's discuss what that means for you. Because when people are saying something, it's very rarely just a number. You know what I mean? As well as for my daughter, it's like, it's not just the ice cream that she wants. She wants a power play with her sister. You know what I mean? She
Yeah.
wants a sugar rush. What is underneath what the person is telling you? In a lot of ways, when you change your perspective, and that took me years to get to, you're no longer reacting to the position that they're projecting out there. You're like, what is underneath all of this? Let me discover that. Let me dissect it with you. And let's see, where exactly does this puzzle match? Because most of the times it does.
How do you know that? Like you mentioned salary negotiations. Let's say you're an employer and someone is negotiating with you. You don't know them very well other than interviewing them for the job. How do you know what's behind the salary request?
You ask questions. One of the things that people just don't do enough is that they don't ask enough questions. In every situation, everywhere, just learn more, 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 more. I I very frequently consult people when they go for a new job. You know what I mean? After the process of like getting hired, that's when I help them with like the salary negotiation. That's like a big chunk of what I do. And what's interesting is that majority of the times the people go to their future employer and the only thing that they state is the salary. They're like,
Yeah.
I just want X amount of dollars. That's everything they say. That's a
Mm-hmm.
that's not a great position to be in, to be honest with you, because the way negotiation works is that it's going to be a dance one way and another,
Yeah.
and you're going to find out things about yourself. The longer your list of requirements is, the better it is. Because then you have items on your list that you can potentially concede when you need to concede something. You can also trade things and you can say, these are my non negotiables, but I'm willing to negotiate here. It makes you sound significantly more collaborative. The same thing for your employer is that for your salary, they usually have a range. They're not going to go outside that range in most cases, unless it's somebody really senior and that like that's like a different kind of employment. But for majority of the people, there is a range. You're going to be within that range. They can give you that, but they need reasons to go up and down that range. And in order to get there, you also need to have that dance. So one of the things that I recommend almost all of my clients is to have a very long list of requirements. So talking about asking questions and going back and forth, you can say, I want X amount of money. I want this many days in the office. I want a corner office, if like that exists anymore, with a white leather chair because that's what I like to sit in. And I would like to have hydrangeas in my office. Like, I don't know, every time I'm there, like whatever it is, make a long, 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 long list that seems completely unreasonable for most people. They're like laughing, like, am I supposed to go to my employer with all of those things? I'm like, yes, 100%. Because they're going to look at this and it's going to be a very different negotiation. They're not just going to look at the number and say, like, I'm working with the number. They're going to be like, okay, so this is a yes, this is a no, this is a yes, this is a no. And then you have a dance. Once the dance comes, it's actually a lot easier to up your number. You can say, okay, so my mood really depends on the hydrangeas in the morning, but if I don't have hydrangeas, you need to pay me more. You know what I mean? Now you have a concession back and forth, and then you have a reason to actually raise your numbers. When if that wasn't on your list to begin with, you actually don't have any trading chips. You want to come into places with trading chips and stuff that you can let go of and stuff that is non-negotiable for you. But a lot of that happens in conversation. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You need to speak to your manager. You need to tell them, like, this is where I'm at. This is the amount of kids that I have. I have an allergy to hydrangeas, and I can't have my coworker have this. Like, whatever it is. The more you talk, the more information's on the table, the more there is trade-off. You know what I mean? Otherwise, you're just screaming positions at one another and you're being like two toddler. I want ice cream. No, I want ice cream. No, I'm not going to give you ice cream. That's not effective communication.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, though you can sound very demanding if you come with a lot of requirements without explaining why it's important to you.
You can still explain them. You
Yeah.
can say all of those things, but you need to have a list. Every time coming places, it's having a list. And the other thing that I always tell people is that um, that comes from over accommodating, thinking that you could be demanding. But in a lot of ways, think about it. You're about to donate most of your hours, most of your waking hours to a project. This is a huge, huge donation. It's a massive exchange. A lot of times people spend more time at work than they spend with their children. If you're going to be doing this, there should be a good dance and you need to have value in yourself and like what you bring to the table. And as long as you see yourself as valuable, trick is other people start seeing you as valuable as well. But every time you underestimate your own list, your own value, you start over accommodating, you actually start looking weak. And long term, that's something that discounts you for a promotion.
With that, I agree. Uh, for sure. I mean, the struggle that I had a lot of times was that I wasn't sure how much I should ask for because I didn't want to ask too much. Because sometimes, if you ask, the thing is, even if you know your value, if you ask, let's say I interview for a role and they're, I don't know, how it's called, the range is between $100 to $120,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I go and I say, I want to earn $200,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I don't know, I do have 4 children. So I have 4 children and I have whatever it is. I give good enough reasons why I need that amount of money. But it's not even realistic for that employer to give me that amount of money.
Why do you think so? You're discounting yourself before you even tried.
I think so because I've been on the employer side many times, and when someone asks for way beyond what we can pay, the concern that I had and not just me, as also HR and as an employer, well, this person is not going to be happy with 120. Let's say 120 is the maximum I can give them. And yes, I can give them equity and other things. Yeah, as you said, there are other things you can trade with. But then knowing that this person asked for 200,000 and maybe they will even agree to the 120K, I'm not sure if they're going to be actually happy with it and stick around for long enough. Should I even hire them?
That's a
Maybe I
really
should
good,
just go with someone that asks for maybe 130.
that's a
And,
very, very
and
good question.
yeah, that was my point of view as an employer, because I did have few cases like that, that someone asked something that was completely outside of our ability to pay,
Hmm.
and we just said, okay, that's not going to work, and we chose not to proceed.
And that's perfectly fine. Sometimes it's not a match. And as you said, like sometimes it's not the right job for the right person. And again, I hope I'm not giving advice to like go ridiculous and ask for something just like a number out of the roof. But in other ways, there's a whole study about the fact that um, bonuses down the line in your corporate career are actually not helping any productivity. So they did that many, many times and they said, like, okay, we're going to give you a big financial bonus, but like we want to have like raise productivity. And the productivity very frequently sank instead of being raised when the bonus was put out in the picture. Because when people go to work, the only real financial conversation they usually have is their big salary conversation. If the salary is matching their lifestyle. If the
Yeah,
salary is matching their lifestyle somewhat, like they can live fine and not think about it on a day-to-day basis, they're generally settled. After that, financial motivators don't really work. But as you said correctly, if the person's lifestyle is not matching the salary in the way that they just need a lot more money, they will be unhappy and they will leave this job and they will not be good at it, which is absolutely true. In the meantime, I have seen even in my practice quite a bit of people asking above the range that is provided in the salary and still getting it. In a lot of ways, asking doesn't mean that you're always getting. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Everything is a dance. Everything is a dance back and forth. It all depends on what's on your list. What can you trade? What can you not trade? So, for instance, one of the ways to potentially raise a salary would be that they want you to travel significantly more. And maybe you don't have four children, and then you're very happy to be on the road like 70% of the time. That is a very interesting way to raise your potential salary in the same job that would take that travel out of somebody else who doesn't want to travel that much. There is a lot of different versions of getting mid bonuses that could be pre-agreed. There is a lot of commission-based assignment. You know what I mean? There is so much to work with. As long as it doesn't come as a position, this is a position, this is where we're going for. It comes as a menu because when you have a menu, that's when you can trade. Another thing that is very important in negotiation on both sides, actually, on both the employer side and the person who is applying for the gig potentially, is both should have BATNA. BATNA is a negotiation term which means best to alternative to a negotiated agreement, which means that you will negotiate very differently if this is the only job that you have an offer to. So you just have to have more jobs. The more
yeah,
jobs you're applying to, the more employers you're speaking to, the better your position is because you're not coming from the state of desperation in that conversation. You're more open-minded to it. The same thing happens with an employer, is that the more candidates that they have that they can compare one against the other, the better your position is. You don't need to settle for something that doesn't work for you. But then maybe you'll find out that you want to pay one person more because they practically bring a lot more to the table. That happens quite a bit as well. Let's say if you are looking for a job in sales and the person comes with their own list, has the relationships already, and is much more effective than the other person who is significantly more junior, even if going to the same role. You know that this person is just going to make you more money. Sometimes it's not possible. There's a lot of situations where it's not possible, but there's also a lot of situations where it is possible to make the role more attractive for that person. Anyways, all I'm saying is that nothing's really defined. Everything's a dance. One of the things that I kind of always say in negotiation is that every no is a start of a conversation. Most
that's
of the
true.
times people start with a no and you're like, "Okay, so why no? What would make you no a yes? Has there ever been precedent of you doing something that you're telling me no about? What was different then? How can I match my situation to how it was back then?" Let's talk about it. And so much beauty happens in this conversation. For instance, I have two kids and they go to school. And I was obsessed about bringing like fencing classes to their school. I don't know, just like fencing. I wanted my children to fence. It's a freaky thing about me. Like I just wanted that to happen. So fencing is really hard to get to. And I found this amazing fencing teacher. And I was like, can you please come to my kids' school and I will organize a class for you and we can do this in the after school hours. Like, how about that? And the response was immediately no. And I looked at this and like I was doing this with another mom. She looks at it, she's like, okay, so they said no, we have to move on. And I'm like, let's find out why not. So I literally called the person and I'm like, I understand that you say no, full respect, no problem with it. I just would like to know why no. Like, what is the background of your no? We ended up learning that they just didn't have the correct transportation. You know what I mean? They couldn't come at those hours because the car they needed to drive their own children, that was not possible. We figured out their transportation situations and we had fencing class for a full year after that. It started with a no, but it was a very sharp no. The thing is, most people don't ask questions. The more questions we ask, the more we usually get.
That's a beautiful story. Yeah, and I think that it goes both ways. Most people don't ask questions, and the other side usually don't provide the context. They just say no, and they don't, because if this person say no, I cannot because I don't have a transportation or whatever, then you can have a conversation. But if they just say no, for many people, it ends the conversation.
Yeah, that's the whole thing with negotiation skills. The everything that a good negotiator does, and coming back to Chris Watson, I actually really like Chris Watson in a lot of ways. But one of the things that a good negotiator does is just asks a bunch of questions. Why do you have this position? What's under your position? How can we make this better for you? Why is this a no? Let's work and see how our facts can potentially match so it becomes a yes. And that is an amazing collaborative negotiation because down the line, everybody gets what they need. The fencing teacher gets more students, makes more money, hopefully, and everything works out perfectly fine. We get the fencing teacher. We just know that we have one thing that is we have mutual interest in solving. Let's solve this thing together. But majority of the times people don't think within those realms. Everybody just shouts their positions at each other. So it's like, I want ice cream. No, I want ice cream. No, 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 no. And then down the line, you're like, well, do we even have ice cream? Like, do we have ice cream that we're trying to share? What kind of container does the ice cream come in? Can we cut that container in half? Do we both like mango ice cream? Or do we want other different types of ice cream? These are all questions, and these questions lead you to a lot of new information.
Oh, it's a fascinating conversation, and personally, I think negotiation should be taught at schools because this is the life skill that so many of us don't have, or we develop it over years, but so crucial.
Well, one thing that was a big shock for me to discover, and again, that's something that I still want to tackle pretty aggressively in the upcoming months, is that I learned that I don't know how it is in Israel, but in the United States, in order to become a real estate agent, you need to get a real estate license, which is, depending on the state, it's a little bit
Yeah.
different. In New York, where I'm at, it's about a 6 weeks course, after which you like go through an exam and like all that. And then you go in the field. It has no negotiation training.
Hmm.
We have real estate agents whose literal job is to negotiate day and night. That's literally what they do. And they have no negotiation training. None. So in a lot of ways, you're sending babies into the war. Like I'm not trying to call people babies, but you need to give people an idea of how to do the actual back and forth. And there's so much beauty around it. And in my personal, like I don't do this very much professionally, but for my personal friends, I helped with a few real estate deals. And you look at this and it's exactly the same issue. Like honestly, a friend of mine was buying a house and we were able it was a it was a very particular story. I don't know if we have time. I'd love to.
We have 6 more minutes. So,
Well, I'll try to tell it quick because it kind
yeah.
of goes underneath everything else that we were talking about earlier. They wanted to buy a house. The house was a little bit too expensive for their budget. They couldn't afford that budget. They're a young couple who are looking to start a family. They really want to have kids. And the house was exactly right for them. And then they went into the house. I actually went to like one of the viewings with them, and they're like, "We don't know what to do. We need to like lower the price, but there's other interested parties. It seems like they're going to have a few offers. We don't know what to do about this, blah, 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 blah." And I came into the house and I started looking at the pictures around, whatever was available of the owners. And it seemed like it was an older couple, like much older couple. And I didn't see any pictures of children. And I was like, what's happening? Like, they don't seem to have whatever it is. Long story short, we found out that this couple didn't have children and didn't have anybody to give their inheritance to. In the meantime, they were going to a retirement facility, and then they couldn't live in the house by themselves anymore, and that's why they put that house on the market. And one of the things that we did is that we presented these buyers as a young couple who want to come into this house, in a lot of ways project what this couple could potentially be dreaming about, which is a new family starting in the place that they loved very, very much. And guess what? We got the house 20% down. And that was
Wow.
amazing because it was not just about money. People always think that negotiation's always about money, but there's a lot of other factors. When somebody built a house for 30 years and kept up the house and their grounds and everything, they care about it so much. They had a vision for it that might have happened or not happened. What happens when people are about to go to a retirement facility? They care. They care at that point in time, they care about their legacy. They don't necessarily care that much about the particular dollar in front of them. What's going to speak to that legacy? How do they want to be remembered? And a lot of times you can actually tap into that in the financial conversation, which is exactly what we did with that house. And that was very successful.
Which just proves that it's a lot about the emotions and the kind of getting to know the people,
Their
feeling
interest,
with people eventually.
where do they come from? Where are they? What's their picture of the world right now? What is the picture of the world you assume them to have? Why
Yeah.
do they act the way they do? Very few people are genuinely irrational. Again, that happens. Very few people are.
Wow, that's a fascinating conversation, Victoria. Before we end, tell our listeners about what you do and how they can find you.
You can go to my website, which is Power of the Ask. I always speak to everybody for free for the first time to see if I could be a good match to your situation. You could be a good match for me. And then after that, we figure out how we work together. I work with leaders on executive presence, which is figuring out how to work through challenging situations and how to project seniority and potentially get you promoted or get you visible in one way or another. I work with some politicians about the same thing, being presentable and speaking to the position that you want to be in. I also help people with very challenging situations. A lot of founders, a lot of M&A, a lot of founder disputes. We look at things and we figure out how we can all live together a little bit better. I also work on like very long-term retainments and just like speak to people all the time about their executive presence, even if they don't have an active conflict going on, to make them prepared for future conflict. That usually happens with pretty senior people. Anyways, I'm having the time of my life, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm giving so much value that I'm like excited about my job. I'm like running to my clients. That's kind of where I
Oh,
am.
that's incredible.
I don't know
That's
if
the
that
best part.
it's so cool for me. Like amazing. And then on Instagram, you can follow us at Instagram Power of the Ask. Very easy. And I love the name of our company because there's so much power in asking. And a lot of times we think asking is a little bit submissive, like, what am I doing by asking? But unless you ask, you don't find out. Going back to everything we spoke about today, ask more questions.
Fantastic way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Victoria. It's been incredible speaking with you today.
Thank you, Limor. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.